All right, ladies and gentlemen, the wait is finally over, and today, my friends, we're here to take a look at the Silence and the Fury DLC. So we're going to be looking at all of the new units for both the Beastmen as well as the Dinos. So without further ado, let us begin here with the Lizardmen. So Oxyotl is the legendary lord for the Dinos, and I actually think he's going to be quite fun in multiplayer and in campaign as well. I did get the chance to play his campaign up to about 20 turns, and I was able to very rapidly get a ton of Chameleon Skinks with him, and you can have some great memes for sure. I think he'll be quite a bit of fun in campaign. Now, as far as multiplayer goes, he's very cheap. He only costs about 1,300 gold, and he has some very good abilities in terms of like sniping, right? So his blow dart, obviously he's the Bane of Chaos. He's basically the Warhammer Fantasy Doomslayer. He goes into the realm of chaos and just, handles business, which is pretty great. But he does have this really nice blowpipe. So this is a pretty good sniping ability, very similar to like Marcus's Amber Bow, but it's a bit more direct. I don't think it quite has the range of Amber Bow. I can't quite remember, but it does have a 200-meter range and just generally does good damage against whatever it hits. It didn't seem to have the best armor piercing, but I did use it against like casters in a couple of the battles I've had the chance to play, and they do quite well. So you can see here, I love it. He's like hiding in the bushes, making it all hard for you guys to see it. Moving back here a little bit. But on top of that, he does have the Master Predator here. So basically, if you pop this, it gives him Unspottable and Snipe. So he can be sitting completely hidden and shooting at something. And this actually came into play a couple times when I was playing some games with Dav. What would happen is he would just sit like behind the Lizardman lines. I kind of just, my brain didn't even process that he was there because the amount of damage he does, it's not like world-ending Marcus Wolfheart damage like Amber Bow, Focus Shot, Anti-Large, but it is armor piercing. So it can bring down big armored characters like Kolek. And, obviously it's very good against like TAUROX, the Brass Bull, right? So he can, I'm pretty sure in a duel, he actually just dominates TAUROX because you could just kite him and poke him down with the attacks, which is pretty funny. 144 range, okay in combat, good enough to get in and fight like casters. But again, he is very squishy, only 30 armor. So if your opponents do discover him and are able to get Spirit Leeches, Fireballs, charge him with a big monstrous, unit, he's going to have a really, really bad time. Also in sustained combat versus Chaff, he doesn't really have a good time as well because of the low armor, and his melee defense is okay at 45. But where he works best, he's just a very cheap character. You set him in your back line, and you just have him basically take pot shots at, high-value targets. And, a lot of the time, I will be keeping the Master Predator online. It gives you Unspottable, it gives you stock, it gives you all sorts of goodies. So, of course, cold-blooded, and he is very slippery, much like his pal Sigvald. And right now you can see he has stock and snipe. So the next unit we're going to be taking a look at here, guys, is going to be the Skink Oracle. So here we are with the mighty Skink Oracle riding atop a Troglodyte, and I do think he's going to be pretty good in multiplayer. So basically Troglodytes are, I would say, a hybrid monster of sorts. They're okay in melee, not the best raw combat stats here. You can see 39, 46, 415. However, poison is something that has been nerfed a little bit. I believe poison was brought down in this patch. Yeah, you can see the values are a little bit lower than before, but it still helps a lot in fighting enemy monsters. But where the Troglodytes really shine is their anti-large missiles. And man, these things hit like absolute trucks. So basically you sit it on top of a Shaggoth, let's say something like Demogryph Knights, any monstrous, big target. It could even be like an Exalted Hero on a Warhorse. As long as it is large and you get that bonus for its large, they just are absolute beasts, right? So what I really like about them is they're incredibly fast with 79 speed. You just shoot in, you pop down those targets with the Troglodyte, and of course then you can charge in and finish them off in melee if need be, or you could run. I mean, these guys are going to be pretty efficient in kiting build as well. But the ultimate thing about the Skink Oracle, I know we've been talking about the Troglodyte, getting them all hyped up, is that the Oracle himself has a really good lore of magic. So he does have access to a bunch of really cost-effective, solid spells. Earthblood is amazing, Fireball is great, Harmonic Convergence is good. Like, all of his spells except Wison's Wild Form are pretty damn good. So he can be pretty much applicable to most matchups. But the one thing about the Skink Oracle is, the only downside in multiplayer at least, is that you cannot bring him on foot. So for example, if you want to get his mixed lore magic, but you're in a matchup in which bringing a big monster like this might be a little bit dangerous, you can't bring him really without running that risk. However, he's very fast with good micro and 79 speed. He can usually dodge cannonballs and things like that. But yeah, I've had pretty good success with him in the multiplayer battles I've had. In campaign, he's also just great. And the best thing about the campaign is that Oxyotl actually starts with one. In the early game, oh my god, these guys are just so damn powerful with their ranged attacks, their cycle charging, their poison, and just the presence, and having that caster early on is good. As far as items go, he does have the Opal Amulet, and he has the War Drums of Zwahatek, I believe is how you say that. Leadership, charge, defense, charge bonus, and speed. So yeah, certainly not bad. The Skink Oracle is a great addition to the Dino roster. I think in general Troglodytes are. However, it's not like Lizardmen had a really bad time shooting down big targets, but now they have like armor piercing, right? Like before you had Solar Engines, Chameleon Skinks, all these cohorts, Pterodons, which did non-AP damage and kind of struggled to bring down some of the bigger targets that were armored. They could still do it through attrition, but now dinos with Oxyotl as well as the Troglodons are much more effective at doing that. So now we will be jumping on over to the next pick here. So here's the new infantry unit for the dinos. It is going to be the Chameleon Stalkers, and these guys are quite cool. They actually have two... It's somewhat similar to blasting charges. It doesn't seem to have the big explosion, but they do have two ranged attacks, which you don't have any control over. So essentially, they just like throw these when they get into combat or when somebody gets in range, and there's a bit of a cooldown between the charges, but it's not bad, right? It's free real estate. Well, I guess you're paying for it when you buy the unit, but it does do fire damage. It is good against light armor, so lightly armored, unshielded targets can actually be pretty effective, and on top of that, they're okay at clearing out chaff. With their 36 melee defense, it puts them above most chaff units' melee attack. They have poison in melee and are surprisingly durable. Of course, Chameleon Skinks, the running theme with them is that they're relatively tough to kill, not because they're like super tanky, because of other mechanics like physical resist down here in the bottom. They also have 20% missile resist. They have high melee defense for their price point, which is about 600 at 36. And they're very fast at 48 speed. So yeah, I think we'll be seeing these guys at a multitude of builds. In campaign, very much like an early game unit, you'll be seeing them used, but again, eventually they'll be phased out after probably the first 15 or 20 turns or so. But yeah, Chameleon Stalkers, I like them quite a bit. Lizardmen had a fair amount of infantry variants, but these guys are cool, and I do think we'll be seeing them in matchups in which Saurus might be overkill. Something like, you know, Chameleon Stalkers going up against like state troopers, fighting like halberd units for the Empire. I think that's where they'll really shine. So those are the glorious Chameleon Stalkers. This is going to be one of the flashier units here on the Dino roster. It is the Quaddle, and this thing is pretty neat for sure. Now, as far as my initial opinions on it in multiplayer, I feel like the Quaddle is a little bit risky. So the fun thing about him is it really has a fun gimmick. The Master of the Sacred Places. Anyone below him gets stalked, which is hilarious. I actually had a matchup in which I had a Quaddle, 2 Engine of the Gods, as well as a Slann. So my entire big dino like goon squad was moving up on my opponent's army invisible. Now, the applications of this could be in matchups against dwarves and Empire, and when you're facing powder factions. If you're worried about being peppered with your big dinos on the approach, you can bring a Quaddle. Now, the Quaddle itself can be shot, but with 80 speed and proper micro, you should be able to juke back and forth and dodge those shots, all while keeping your elite units underneath his umbrella invisible, which is really cool. So I'm really excited to see some high-level players get their hands on the Quaddle. I've had mixed experiences. It's okay in combat, 40, 48, 395. Still a decent gooning character, can take out lightly armored targets, but again, against other dedicated anti-large monsters, this bad boy is going to be having a problem. Bound spells, he's got Euron and Thunderbolt here, as well as lesser Chain Lightning, so the Chain Lightning doesn't do quite as much damage. But something I have to say, playing with the Quaddle a little bit, and in multiplayer, having him plus a Slann, him plus Mazda Money, you get Banishment, Ruination of Cities, you get 2 charges of the Thunderbolt, as well as a Chain Lightning. You are getting so much free magic with Lizardmen, which is incredibly cool. So yeah, a bit of a tricky one. In campaign, it's not bad. You know, it's a flying monster, and flying monsters in campaign can be used very effectively to abuse the AI. But in multiplayer, I don't know. I don't know how they're going to be, honestly. Like, my logical side wants to tell me it's going to be a little bit tricky to pull off. There's more efficient choices, but you know, my inner hope is saying that I think they'll be cool because they can potentially hide you in certain matchups, and they're still pretty good at gooning. So that is the Quaddle, and now we have the Troglodon coming up next. So now we have the Big Daddy Troglodon, and he's pretty damn cool. So this guy, like I said, we kind of talked about it with the Skink Oracle, but anti-large, armor piercing, he's got poison in both melee as well as his range attacks, and highly mobile. Obviously, this DLC has a lot of synergies with mobility. We have the Chameleon Stalkers, which are very quick. We do also have Oxyotl, who's pretty darn quick when you turn off his Master Ambusher. I think his speed goes up to like 48 or something. Let's go ahead and double check. No, 54, yeah, so he's even swifter. So a lot of mobility for the dinos. And, you know, their playstyle traditionally has been solar engines with like a defensive line of Chameleon, Skinks, and Saurus and cohorts. But I'm really excited to see if the Quaddles and, of course, the Troglodons open up some other styles of play. I do think Troglodons will be pretty good in campaign. It's hard to doomstack them, though, because they're not super efficient against infantry compared to some of the other Lizardman beasts. That's why Stegodons in campaign are so prevalent. But Troglodons, as an early game unit in campaign, you do start with the Skink Oracle. Very, very good. And yeah, you could still make good use of them. If you want to have like a more balanced army in campaign, you could have a couple of these and then some Stegodons, and they'll annihilate big targets. Their ranged poison attacks, man oh man, they hit like absolute trucks. Massive weapon damage. And it seems like something in multiplayer that could potentially be tuned eventually, because I've seen a Troglodon just like nuke down big targets so quickly. But yeah, they're very fun. Really like these dinos, and yeah, the Lizardmen got some good stuff. Time will tell how good it is in multiplayer once people get their hands on it, but as far as campaign goes, I mean, Quaddles are going to be super fun. I think a lot of the beasties they did get are going to be great. So those are all the basic units for the dinos. Now we're going to be looking at the new RORs, most of which are, of course, new units, but they also did get an ROR feral Carnosaur here, which we'll be taking a look at here in just a moment. So we'll see you guys in a second. All right, my friends, let's taste the rainbow here. We do have the Spirit of Tephak, the Quaddle. So this guy has some different spells. He does have Banishment, or Lesser Banishment, I should say, as well as Shield of Thorn, so much like the Sisters of Thorn. And yeah, I mean, it's a little bit different. I mean, depending on the matchup, if you're looking for like a big alpha strike, this could be kind of nice, right? If you have a Slon, for example, with a couple big dinos you're trying to protect, he gives them stock. You Shield of Thorns for the physical resist, then you use the Shield of the Old Ones, stack a ton of damage resist on your units, and I can see some cool combos. He does, of course, have the Master of the Sacred Places. He's got magic resist and a little bit of missile resist as well. So that is the Spirit of Tephak here. And next up, we have the Get Blam's Terror. This is the ROR Carnosaur. And the main difference between him is he has a better stat line than standard Carnosaurs. And on top of that, he doesn't rampage. So I think that's something that we could be seeing as an addition to any multiplayer builds in which you want to bring a Carnosaur. He doesn't cost that much more. I think it was only a couple hundred gold more, and he doesn't rampage, which is huge, right? Rampage forces you to use cold blood. Oftentimes you can forget about that. The monsters can get lost in spears, but having a more kind of controlled feral Carnosaur that's just objectively better in combat, I think could be nice in a multitude of matchups. Next up, we have the Pale Death, the Feral Troglodyte ROR. So this guy does have the Primeval Roar. So when he's engaged in melee, essentially, let's see. So when he's engaged in melee, oh, it recharges. Okay. So yeah, a lot of units I actually noticed in this particular patch, their abilities start on cooldown, then they come off. So they'll either start ticking up, or if there's a condition to be met, they have to meet that condition in combat. But here he does have the Primal Roar, which can actually buff things in melee. Kind of cool. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, he's decent in melee for sure. Much better than the standard Troglodyte. Looking real cool right here. So maybe he'll be good with like a mobile cav build. Like you have him running around the flanks. He's harassing. He's poking at enemy cavalry. And when the big alpha strike happens, he pops his Primeval Roar among other Lizardmen buffs. And you can get some nice combos. So those are the RORs. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the breakdown here of the Lizard forces. As far as the big winners for multiplayer goes, I think Oxyotl will be quite good. Slons are so damn powerful, it's hard to sometimes pick other choices, but I think he'll be kind of a mid-tier Lizardman character that can win some games. You guys will see a replay coming up in the next couple days in which he just went Super Saiyan. And like they were down in the bounce of power, he brought it back. You guys will know when you see it. It was quite fun. The Skink Oracle I think will be quite good as well. I would give it a good mark because it has an amazing kit of spells and the Troglodyte is very good at what it does. So if you need anti-large, it'll get the job done and bring a great lore magic. Chameleon Stalkers, haven't had a chance to try them too much. They're obviously very cheap. They don't cost too much. And yeah, they're pretty durable by their standards. I think if you don't want to quite invest in Saurus, but you want something that can hold its own against melee chaff, they're going to be your choices. Now, the Quaddles, I have no idea about these. Like, it's a very big gimmick, and I don't know. I often don't think gimmicks like that work terribly well, but it could surprise us. The non-rampaging Carnosaur here, I think, will be okay. I think in matchups in which you want a big Carnosaur and you don't want to have to worry about using Cold Blood on it over and over, I think this bad boy will do the trick. And the Troglodytes, I think, are some of the big winners as well. They're mobile, they hit like trucks, good enough to goon smaller characters, and very good at sniping bigger targets. So there is the Lizardman roster. And now, my friends, we're going to be jumping on over to the dreaded Beastmen. All right, guys, and now we're here with the Beastmen side of things. We do have TAUROX the Brass Bull, the namesake of the DLC. He is indeed the Fury, although I guess Oxyotl's kind of pissed off as well. But TAUROX is a really cool character. Probably my favorite element overall. One of the coolest things about TAUROX actually is when he runs. I don't know if it'll make the sound right now, but when he runs, it makes like a metallic sound, like a crushing metal sound. Very, very cool. Now, as far as what he brings to the table, normally monstrous characters like this, like Nakai, do struggle quite a bit because they don't quite have enough mass to get through things like a big monster, and they don't really have the defensive capabilities they need. But TAUROX kind of addresses those weaknesses. In my experience, he's very easily able to push through infantry. He also has an attack animation that lets him roll through units, and he doesn't get ping-ponged like a Gorble. So I do think that TAUROX is quite a bit better than Nakai. He has 130 armor, very good leadership, amazing combat stats, armor piercing, charge bonus, but more importantly, he has this ability called the Brass Body. Oftentimes with monstrous characters, the outcome of their performance can really come down to a clutch moment of combat in which they either take a bunch of burst damage and survive and give it back. You guys get the picture. So Brass Body gives him 40% ward save and also melee defense. He has the Blood Beast, which sounds like a Rob Zombie song here. You can see we're going to go ahead and pop this. Does some nice AoE fire damage right there, and that's very good if he's surrounded by spears, state troopers, just chaff units, and you do end up getting stuck. Let's say he kind of loses his momentum. You can then pop the Blood Beast, and will give him a way to get out, as it has a big knockback, also does good damage, and lowers leadership. So there are going to be, matchups and factions in which that will be very, very useful. On top of that, he has the Rune Tortured Axes, which is a constant effect when he is in melee combat. He gets the Rune Tortured Axes, and it's very good. Melee attack, extra damage. He's got the Slaughterer's Call, which of course we've seen in the past. Melee attack, charge bonus, and leadership. and the Blood Agreed. TAUROX does also have 15% missile resist, which is very standard for Lord characters. So that's the Brass Bull. I'm definitely quite excited to use him in combat. My overall opinions on the Brass Bulls, I think he's going to be decent. I think he'll be a nice niche choice for the Beastmen. Not going to be great in every matchup. We have had some, test matches with him against like the Empire or factions that have really good dedicated armor piercing. He can go down to that relatively quick despite the brass body, but in matchups in which you don't have to worry about that, let's say like Warriors of Chaos, if you're fighting, those type of infantry-based factions, he can really be super disruptive. And even against like factions that do have good stopping power like Skaven, if you time it correctly with a big alpha strike, popping the brass body, he can get in there and do the dirty for sure. Also pretty good against like vampire counts. He can clear out chaff. He's strong enough in combat to fight their monsters. Beastmen definitely got some really good tools for that. So that is TAUROX. And next up we'll have the War Agor. The War Agor is a new hero here for the Beastmen, and he's kind of an interesting niche here. He does have a silver shield, 80 armor, relatively durable by Beastmen standards, and that's kind of the name of the game here in this DLC. The Beastmen got a lot of durable monsters and units that give them staying power. Typically, they did struggle against those type of things, right? Like terror routes and focus fire, and they would struggle, dealing with that stuff. But now the War Agor is here. He's got the Sword of Antiheroes, Foe Seeker, and the Potion of Speed in multiplayer. His main ability here is going to be the Will of the Dark Gods. I can see builds where you go with double War Agor on foot in certain matchups, and you basically just bring like Malagor flying around in the sky, cackling and doing all that haggard stuff like that. But that is the War Agor. Not much to say about him. I haven't had the chance to really experiment. If you do cut him down to his basic kit, he only costs about 600 gold and can be pretty functional. In campaign, it's quite nice. It gives the Beastman a nice little combat character. So I definitely enjoyed using him in campaign, but that is the War Agor. He has a couple mount options, which I think we'll be seeing more. He has the Razor Gore Chariot, which is the very expensive chariot, and he has the new chariot, which we'll be showing you next, which is the Tusk Gore Chariot. So I think we'll probably be seeing him on a cheap chariot against dwarves. That's very cost effective. You put him on the cheap chariot, it costs like 850 gold, a good dedicated armor-piercing chariot. So that's the War Agor, and we'll see you guys in the next unit. So I think this is one of the big winners of the DLC. These are the Tusk Gore Chariots. They are anti-infantry, armor-piercing chariots, much like Razor Gores, which is kind of strange, right? Like, in my opinion, Razor Gore Chariots are like, now after these guys have been included, these things only cost 750, whereas Razor Gores cost like 1100. So Razor Gores are like buying brand name clothing, right? It has a big fancy brand, but when you really look at it in the brass tacks, it's no better than some of the, more generic brands, right? Same goes for like medicines and things like that. And the Tusk Gore Chariot is like the generic brand compared to the, flashy, exotic brand, perhaps, that is a little bit overpriced. These guys get the job done. I don't think you're going to be seeing Razor Gore Chariots at all anymore. Tusk Gore Chariots are the new way. They're just cheaper, they have good armor, and honestly, they get the job done, and their stats aren't that much worse, really, which is pretty crazy. So big winner here in the DLC, going to be very useful for the Beastmen. Granted, they do have a lot of armor-piercing stuff like Razor Gores that can fill a similar role, but they're a very cheap price point for a chariot, and the fact that they have AP makes them very dynamic. So those are the Tusk Gore Chariots. Now we have the moment everybody's been waiting for here, the Jabber Slythe. So the Jabber Slythe is a very cool unit, going to be amazing in campaign. In campaign, obviously the AI isn't very good at focus firing, so you're not going to have to worry too much about the fact that it can't regenerate and has, okay armor. But Jabber Slythe has something called the Aura of Madness. So the Beastmen now have access to a Mortis Engine. However, it's very conditional. So basically, if the enemy's leadership is below 50%, they start taking Mortis Engine damage, which is great. So this is going to be excellent for the Beastmen in matchups in which you're facing, big, hordes of chaff units. So let's say vampire counts. I don't know about Tomb Kings. Tomb Kings do have a fair amount of range tools, but against Chaos, this is going to be very good. It's an anti-infantry, armor-piercing monster. It does poison damage. It does magic, which is, circumstantially pretty good. And it causes terror as well, so it can't be broken or terror routed. I think the Jabber Slythe is going to be pretty cool. 65 speed. What's really good about the Jabber Slythe actually is its attack animation. It has one where when it attacks, it like leaps super far and makes it very, very tough for the enemies to kind of keep pace with it. But I mean, it has a Mortis Engine. Mortis Engines are probably one of the strongest things in the entire game. So, not a whole lot to complain about here. I think the Beastmen have gotten some very strong elements, and they really needed it as well. So that is the Jabber Slythe. And next up, we'll be taking a look at another big friend of his. Now we're here with the big man himself, the Gorgon. I've seen him being played in tabletop quite a bit, actually, in both Age of Sigmar and some fantasy bat reps I've seen. This is the Gorgon. He is awesome, and I think he's probably the best element of him and the Chariot are both really, really cost effective. So the Gorgon costs 2,000 gold. It's very quick for a big monster like this, 64 speed, and when it accelerates, man, oh man, this thing gets some momentum and just does some work. So he regenerates when he's in combat. Anytime you get a big regenerating monster, I'd call that a win. He does also have the Blood Greed, so he gets, when he's engaged in melee, he gets melee attack, he gets the leadership charge bonus. The ITP doesn't matter, simply because he causes terror, therefore he is immune to terror. And yeah, just an absolute beast. I think the Gorgon really helps the Beastmen quite a bit. And I remember back in the early days, Beastmen used to just have massive problems against like Tomb Kings and these factions that could bring big oppressive monsters. Vampire counts as well. I mean, Beastmen had a horrible matchup versus vampire counts. And I think that's all going to change now. The Gorgon, of course, it deals with the large threats. The Jabber Slythe gives you another way outside of squishy, kind of low leadership infantry to deal with hordes of infantry. Overall, I think the Gorgon is a huge winner here in this DLC, and in the early access battles I've been having a ton of success with him, and I really do enjoy him quite a bit, especially the ROR Gorgon, which does cost 2,500, but you guys will be seeing him in a second. He actually has a very familiar ability that many of you Skaven players will enjoy. So now it's time for the regiments renown here. We do have the Grog Hooves of Wolf's Run. So these are basically just drunken centaurs with throwing axes. And I don't know about them. I think they could be cool. They do have healing and perfect vigor. So, you know, they're kind of a squishy unit. So they're going to be losing models at a very rapid pace. Therefore, the healing isn't quite as effective. But I don't know. The perfect vigor, of course, is quite cool. And although I think basic centaurs have something similar. They have like the rowdy mechanic. I guess the main thing that you're getting with them is going to be the drunken bravado and the healing. A very cool thing, you know, in campaign, if you're going to be getting them, I think they're probably going to be more effective in campaign. As far as multiplayer goes, I guess the healing is always pretty good, right? But, you know, time will tell. These are the Grog Hooves of Wolf's Run. Next up, we have the Vorbergland Broodmother. So this is the Jabber Slythe ROR, and basically it's a little bit better in combat. It does also have the Armor Sundering, which the other Jabber Slythe that we look does not have, so it replaces its poison with Armor Sundering, and you know, that has some nice synergies with Beastmen. Of course, you have a lot of cheap stuff that like Gore Herds and Ungor Raiders that don't have the best AP, but this bad boy will potentially remedy that problem for you. He's got the Aura of Madness Mortis Engine, the Searing Bile of Blood, which we forgot to look at with the other Jabber Slythe. They both have that. So this Jabber Slythe, the original one, does have the Spurting Bile of Blood, which apparently isn't quite as good as the big one, which is the Searing Bile of Blood. So this actually sunders armor as well. Basically, when Jabber Slythes are engaged in combat, every 15 seconds they kind of unleash a little poison explosion under them, which makes them even better at infantry. So AoE explosion. On top of that, they have a Mortis Engine. Jabber Slythe will be pretty good against infantry. Granted, they are big targets, they're expensive, and do come with a bit of a price tag, like I said. The Blood Brute Behemoth. Now, this guy is usually big, expensive, Chungus monsters like the Shredder of Lustria are a little bit tough to get their value back. It's a big gamble, right? But the Blood Brute Behemoth at 2,500 gold, he might be worth it because he has scaling damage. So he has the same ability that Deathmaster Snakeage has, and I had a game where he just like beat on someone for almost like 1,000 damage when they're almost dead, and it can be a game changer for sure. The Blood Brute Behemoth is very cool, very pricey, so you really need to make sure it's a matchup in which he's good. In campaign, he's going to be great. Scaling damage is super good. So the Blood Brute Behemoth is probably my favorite ROR of the three. So that's it for many of the Beastmen units. There are a couple other ones. We have the Doom Bull, which we'll be looking at in just a second, as well as the Great Bray Shamans. So here we are in the lobby looking at the Great Bray Shamans. Not too much to look at with them, but we do have beasts, we have death, we have shadows, as well as the wilds. So these are the new Bray Shamans available. Their items and mounts, they do have the Tusk Chariot as well as the Razor Chariot, and they do have the Forbidden Rod, which we all know is one of the best things to stroke here in this game. And those are the Bray Shamans. So now I'll be jumping over and looking at the last new addition to the Beastmen roster, which is going to be the dreaded Doom Bull. Right, guys, and now we're here with the Doom Bull. Doom Bull is an absolute beast. He does have a very unique ability that kind of sets him apart from TAUROX, which is the Dazed effect. So when the Doom Bull gets in combat and hits you, he actually slows you down by 25%. And this is really good. Beastmen are a faction that if they can catch their prey, lock them down and swarm them, they can really get huge benefits. So having a 64 speed monster, for example, if like a cavalry unit comes in, let's say somebody comes in with Knights of the Blazing Sun, which Empire players love to use against Beastmen, you can countercharge with the Doom Bolt, lower their speed by 25%, which will put them to around 50, if not speed in the 40s. And then, your Minotaurs, your other monsters are going to be able to catch them easily. So very, very good. The Dazed ability is awesome. Obviously, he doesn't hit quite as hard as TAUROX, not quite as durable. He has less armor, so they serve different roles, which I think is quite good. He has the Hellfire Sword. I don't know how he uses a sword with those giant things on his hands, but we don't ask questions here in Total War Warhammer. He's got the Deadly Onslaught, the Potion of Foolhardiness in multiplayer, and his last ability is the Barbed Knuckle Boxing, which I love the naming of that. It's so fun. 24 melee attack, base weapon damage. We pop it, puts him up to 575 and 71. I do think in many situations, the Doom Bull might be a more cost-effective choice than TAUROX. He costs about 400 or 500 less, give or take, and he does have that dazed ability, and slowing mechanics are very strong. However, TAUROX has an AoE damage ability. He has ward save to make him even tougher to kill, so it's a trade-off, which I think is good. Unlike, Nakai is just objectively worse than the Kroxigor Ancient, right? Whereas the Doom Bull and TAUROX have different roles, different utility, and both, I think, feel very unique and distinct from one another. So that is the Doom Bull. I think he's an awesome addition to the roster, and that is it. So those are all the new units that'll be coming with the two DLC factions. hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Let me know in the comment section below, which units do you guys think are going to be the winners? Which ones do you think will be the Walmart units that we'll never see? I'd be very curious to get feedback from all of you, whether you might be new to the game or you're an advanced tournament player. Please do let me know your feedback in the comment section below. And over the course of the next week, we'll be showing you all sorts of cool battles. We have the ECL Season 6 Grand Finals coming up, which we'll be using this DLC. And yeah, all sorts of great stuff. And as soon as we get those darn patch notes, I'll make sure to do a big video because there have been a ton of changes, all of which so far I definitely agree with. There's some changes that I'm hoping to see more of because, you know, those greenskins still looking a little bit suspicious over there, but we'll go from there. Thanks again for joining, guys. Really appreciate you all. If you're new to the channel, please like and subscribe. Join the party. It's going to be good, man. We're going to have a lot of good times going into Warhammer 3 and beyond. So take care, guys, and see you next time. Cheers.